sense of control and what that means. Let me actually, are you recording all this? Okay. So, because control is a big issue for all people, especially cops, I think. So first I want to talk about the illusion of control. So people, when they play the lottery themselves and they pick their own numbers, they think they have a better chance of winning. So that's an example of illusion of control. Or when they roll dice and want a high number, they roll harder. And if they want a low number, they roll softer, believing they can control the outcome. And then almost everybody reports that they feel safer if they're the driver than if somebody else is the driver. So that's an illusion of control, except for maybe the driving. We all believe that we're better drivers than most people. But if you don't have a sense of control, the studies show that people who feel like their life is out of their own control and that they don't have agency as much, they're more likely to be depressed and withdrawn and feel hopeless. So having control can feel very powerful, and having power can feel good. So that's one of the reasons that having control feels good. So this is going to linger on a tiny bit here. So this is a very common, widely used concept in psychology. It's called the locus of control, where your control resides in your life. So it's really a way of viewing the world that each person has to some degree. So an internal locus of control means that you feel like you're in control, like you are controlling your destiny, you make things happen, you set your own course. And people with that generally are happier and function better and are more successful. And then the external locus of control are those people who blame everything on outside forces. There's nothing I can do, it's out of my control, what's the point? So these kind of things are not generally helpful. Okay, let me go to that. And if you guys have questions or anything, just jump in at any time. Okay, so there's a little bit of a predicament here. That is, the predicament is, if control feels good and you need a sense of control to feel healthy, but most things are out of your control, and you think by this bias that we all have that you have more control than you do, these things are kind of in contradiction, and what is one to do about that? So this is one of the more famous prayers because it's been adopted by AA. So I'll just read it. It's, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So this is a pastor who said this. So that's very nice and correct, but how do you do that? How do you just become wise? And that's really the rub, and that's hard to do. So there's some steps one can take. One, just know that we all have a bias thinking that we have more control than we actually do. So once it's sort of built into the software of your brain to believe you have more control than you do. And when you think you have all that control, you really don't. But that said, you do want to have an internal locus of control. So you want to feel like you are driving the ship and not the outside world is driving it for you. But the key there is to take ownership of the things that you can actually control. You can't control other people. You can't control other situations. You can only control yourself and your responses. Okay, and the illusion of control is easier when things are generally going well. Like CEOs of companies think, of course, I'm worth this much money. I'm doing so great. And all the studies show that CEO pay doesn't really make a difference. So this is a quote from, changing subjects, Mario Andretti, a famous race car driver. If everything seems under control, you're just not going fast enough. And I think that's a nice quote because once life becomes very, very stressful and you're really faced with it, you realize you don't have all that control. And part of ironically, taking control of the situation is realizing that you don't have control over most things in your life. So then if you're going too fast, sometimes your body can revolt, and this is tangentially related to control. You can have sort of panic attacks. And what's very scary, this is sort of even one more step of loss of control. It's you can't even control your own body, and it can be very frightening. You know, why is my heart racing? Why is this happening? And then all those thoughts start going exactly like I'm saying. Why is this happening? What's wrong with me? Am I having a heart attack? And that spins and spins and spins, and that's just that fight or flight loss of control. You have all that fight or flight, but nowhere to go and nobody to fight. So other techniques, I mean, some techniques to help you sort of stay grounded and stay in control and accept where you don't have control. Mindfulness is one of those things. And it's especially good for panic attacks. It's just coming back to what you're doing as you're doing it. So the more you focus in on what you're really doing and pay attention to it, people are just happier, and they are, it can be an antidote for panic attacks to avoid them. And that's exactly what you're supposed to do as you're having a panic attack, sort of reground and refocus on what's actually happening in your surroundings, and not just thinking. Okay, this is Albert Ellis, is one of the founders of what's called cognitive behavioral therapy, which is probably the most widely adopted and best studied therapies in all of psychology. So he says, and this is a nutshell of his whole theory, people and things do not upset us. Rather, we upset ourselves by believing they can upset us. So it's that belief that the outside world is harming us. It's your reaction. You can control your reaction. That's where he's saying you should step in, and that's where you should take control. And here is another quote that I love and this is part of it, by a guy named Viktor Frankl. He was a Holocaust survivor, and a psychiatrist, I believe. And one of his famous quotes is, between stimulus and response, there's a space. And so that's where your control lies. And then I have a graphic of his entire quote. So I'll read the whole quote from Viktor Frankl. It says, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. So that's really where you have control. That's really where you should focus, put your money down on the table for the power of control, not controlling other people, not controlling what's happening. And even this often breaks down because you get overwhelmed, but to know that something bad happens, which is the stimulus, and then you have a response. Most people just react. There's a stimulus and you react. And that's kind of how the nervous system is set up. You get hit with the reflex hammer, your knee kicks out. So that's a stimulus and the reaction. But what you want to do is fill that space and have a response, to think things through, to gather your own thoughts and your own emotions, and then approach things, knowing what you can change and what you can't change. And that's it. Quick and to the point. If you guys have any questions or anything, just let me know. Otherwise, I will turn the table over.